I'm Mark Franklin, practice leader of a team of professional career counselors at careercycles.com and founder of One Life Tools. I'm pleased to be your host today on Career Buzz, Canada's unique podcast conversation that enriches lives, empowers careers, and energizes organizations. What is positive psychology? How can it help us to flourish in our careers and lives? These are questions that today's guest can help answer. Guests were all speakers at the recent Canadian Positive Psychology Association's National Conference. Keynote speaker Kim Cameron is Professor of Management and Organizations at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. His current research focuses on virtuousness in organizations, such as forgiveness, gratitude, kindness, and compassion, and their relationship to performance. Frustrated after a workplace accident, Hardy Premsuk started working with psychologists, doctors, mathematicians, and other experts to develop a comprehensive platform that could create a more complete picture of how the body and mind work together. Stay tuned for Hardy Premsuk also in the second half of today's show. But first, Veronika Huta obtained her Ph.D. in clinical psychology at McGill University in Montreal. At the University of Ottawa now, she teaches stats and positive psychology. Her research compares different ways of defining and pursuing the good life, also called Eudaimonia, which is the pursuit of excellence, virtue, and personal growth. And she compares that with hedonia, which is the pursuit of pleasure, enjoyment, and comfort. She studies these pursuits in relation to personal well-being, the well-being of the surrounding world, cognitive and physiological responses, and predictors such as parenting styles and worldviews. She is a founder of the Canadian Positive Psychology Association and serves on the editorial board of the Journal of Happiness Studies. Veronika, welcome to Career Buzz.
Thank you very much.
Veronika, just to help listeners understand, you said it's all about the pursuit of well-being, and there's hedonia and eudaimonia. Can you start off just with a basic distinction for listeners?
Sure. Eudaimonia, you can think of it as eudaimonia, the diamond within you. It's a Greek term. It's an ancient Greek term. And it comes largely from the writings of Aristotle, who argued that, look, the purpose of life is not just enjoyment and pleasure. So that's the hedonic concept. The purpose of life, and actually he was quite the eudaimonist. He didn't like the concept of hedonia at all. He believed that the purpose of life should be to act in accordance with virtue. So to try to be a good person, to try to grow, use your full potential, and so on. Psychologists nowadays have a more balanced perspective of that, so it isn't one or the other. I mean, throughout history, philosophers have tended to side with one camp or the other. So there were the hedonic philosophers, the eudaimonic philosophers. Nowadays, with the research backing it up, there's recognition that you really need both, and they fill different niches in well-being. Hedonia is hedonic pursuit. So let me describe a little bit more what each of these things is. So hedonic pursuits are pursuit of pleasure, pursuit of comfort, avoidance of pain. That pretty much is the term that we're all familiar with. Eudaimonic pursuits there's a 4-part definition that we've published. It includes authenticity, the pursuit of meaning, including caring about the big picture, excellence. Excellence includes both ethics, so excellence in the ethical domain, and also excellence in terms of the standards of your performance, and personal growth. And personal growth has 3 components. There's learning, there's becoming who you are as a unique individual. That's referred to as self-actualization. And then there's this more sort of general sort of process of personal growth that applies to all human beings, and that would be called maturation. So, there's certain criteria that have been studied. I shouldn't call them criteria, but certain characteristics that have been studied to, describe a more mature individual. So that would be the eudaimonic piece of it. And the research really shows that they fill different niches. So, for example, the eudaimonic pursuits that you have in your life, when you strive to grow, you strive to contribute to other people's lives, that builds a lot of a sense of meaning. And the meaning tends to be long-term, so the benefits tend to be long-term. Hedonic pursuits, and I'm not an anti-hedonist. I think there's a place for hedonia. I think there's a very important place, and I think it can be done in a very healthy way. But you have to sort of pick and choose the things that are truly good for you. And if you want to cover sort of the whole spectrum of what, say, hedonism or hedonia might represent, there's orientations. So hedonia, you might think to yourself, I want to experience some pleasure. So that would be a motive piece of what it means to be hedonic. The behavioral piece, the behavior that you might do as a consequence, might be eating chocolate. So that was the example that I gave in my talk. The feeling piece, so there are also feelings obviously associated with these various lifestyles or various pursuits. The feeling you might get is pleasure, satisfaction, and maybe a bit of a sore stomach and nausea because you've overdone it with your chocolate. And then finally, the fourth piece is also an outcome, but it's more of a long-term outcome. If you do a lot of chocolate eating, in the long run, you become good at what's called savoring. So you develop a skill, hopefully, if you're mindful about it, you'll develop a skill whereby you'll know just how much chocolate to eat in order to derive the pleasure, but not have the pain.
And you nailed it with this. You had a table at the very end of your presentation that you said you'd been working on for a long time, and one cell at the bottom right there came up, and it was this savoring piece.
Absolutely.
You were trying to really nail this, because somebody had asked a question also, isn't hedonia kind of problematic? We're all going to overindulge in addictions, and it leads to all these negative things, and yet you've now told us about savoring, which sounds quite positive.
Yes, that's right. So if you look at the history of the research in this area right up until last year when I really started grappling with this, and when people were talking about what I would call functioning, which includes things like your achievements, your abilities, the skill set, and the healthy habits that you've cultivated over time, they really only talked about them in the eudaimonic sense. So eudaimonic types of aspects of functioning are things like the capacity for self-regulation, right? Delay of gratification, being able to plan for the future, and things like that. And that sort of the symmetrical side of it, or the opposite, the hedonic side of it, really had been ignored. And I felt, I drew this nice table, and I wrote the stuff that was on the hedonic side and the eudaimonic side, and then I looked at the table and I realized there was a piece of the table just completely absent from the literature. So I started asking myself, are there healthy things that a hedonically oriented person will become good at? And so I've developed a theoretical model of that, and that includes things like being capable of what I call healthy selfishness, being capable of living in the moment, going with the flow, being spontaneous, being capable of living in your body, sensuality, being in touch with that sort of more primal, beautiful side of yourself, and of course savoring as well. So this is all theoretical at present, but I do have a hunch that this is going to prove to be, certainly a valid skill set and distinct from the eudaimonic skill set. And there's a study that I'm just about to start running to look at that.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. I really liked it when it came up in the presentation, and I think listeners will get a lot out of some of those ideas. Healthy selfishness, for instance, that somebody picked up on in the conference.
I've given a couple of talks on that, actually, because it's a little bit of a counterintuitive idea, isn't it? One of the talks I gave just before Christmas, and I called it, I think, something like Healthy Hedonism for the Holidays, Ho, Ho, Ho. And the whole session was about that. It was about, how do you pursue hedonic things? And we need those hedonic things. If you're just purely eudaimonic and you're always giving and you're always sacrificing yourself, it's going to lead to exhaustion. It's going to lead to a disconnection from your body. And so you need that hedonic piece to get the rest that you need, to fill your tanks, so to speak. A good friend of mine, she refers to it as filling my tanks. And there's a little bit of an art to figuring out the things that really fill your tanks and the things that you think will fill your tanks but that won't.
So in the eudaimonia world, where you talk about things like pursuit of meaning, right? So we're also on a Career Buzz show. There's many people thinking about career and workplace issues. And it seems that that's where it fits. People look for meaning in their work. They look to be authentic. They pursue excellence. They may experience personal growth in their work. And yet it seems like it's kind of opposite of the hedonia perspective. So how does that connect, right? The eudaimonic ideas here and the definition that you've given us and how it might apply to people pursuing meaningful work.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a very nice parallel, actually, to a study that one of my graduate students has completed. You can carry over this concept into the workplace, looking at what are called work orientations. And there are three main work orientations. You'll recognize them when I describe them. One of them is a job orientation. One of them is a career orientation. And the last one is a calling or a vocation orientation. A job mindset, if that's how you see your job and that's the relationship you have with your job, is I just go to work, I'm doing it to make the money.
So that I can enjoy my pleasures afterwards.
Exactly, afterwards and outside of work. So that's a job mindset. And what's interesting is, to a fair degree, not entirely, but to a fair degree, you can actually shift your perception. You can be doing almost any kind of work, and you can shift your perception to make it a more fulfilling form of work orientation. So the second category of work orientation is a career orientation. A lot of people are sort of in that mindset. That's more, it has both a piece to it that where the person's genuinely interested in what they do. So it's not just blasé, I'm interested, or at least reasonably interested in what I'm doing. But it also has a strong component of wanting to move forward. So this kind of climbing the ladder, I want to move forward to a more prestigious position. I want to build my career. I want to have greater influence, that kind of thing. So this idea that the career's okay, the topic of what you're doing is reasonably interesting, not necessarily a turnoff. But you're doing it largely for that movement forward. It's a means to an end. And that one, so the job orientation tends to have, as you might guess, a not very healthy relationship with various indices of well-being. The career orientation is kind of neutral, and I think it's because it has positive and negative elements. So there's, you do buy into the work a lot more than you do with a job mindset, but at the same time, you're still pursuing what would be called extrinsic motives, right? So there's this whole theory in the psychological literature, very powerful theory that differentiates between intrinsic and extrinsic motives. Extrinsic things like status, image, power, popularity, those are all things that sound really star-spangled, they sound really spectacular, but actually they're not fulfilling. Pursuit of those things is actually negatively related with well-being, which is something that a lot of people are not aware of.
They don't get that. And that, I think, is that idea of miswanting in career, and people want the money, the advancement, and the prestige, just to pick three things, and when they get it, they realize that it wasn't all that it was cracked up to be.
That's right.
And that they might have known, they might have avoided that learning. Let's say it's still a learning, but they might have avoided that difficult, possibly painful, possibly lengthy learning experience, had they understood that distinction here that we're talking about.
Well, this is where the third category, or the third work orientation, comes in, and that is seeing your work as a calling or as a vocation. What that basically means, and you can transform, like I said, you can transform a lot of situations into a calling. It's putting yourself into it. It's expressing your personal values through your work. It's identifying with your work. It's finding a way to express a piece of yourself. And, there's some beautiful examples in Marty Seligman's book illustrating how a person can be doing just about anything and turn it into a calling. And he was describing an orderly who worked in a hospital. And, you would think that sounds like a rather dull job, but he inspired the people around him because he was the person who brought plants into the rooms and in pictures, even though nobody was asking him to do this. And he would stop and chat with the different patients. And he kind of became when you're around somebody like that, they inspire everybody around them, and they just create this culture. And I remember, after having read that, I walked into a grocery store, and And there was this person for whom being a grocery clerk was a calling. And it was just beautiful.
Yeah.
I still remember this guy. I mean, this was years ago. And I remember walking in there, and it was just such a pleasure for him to ask, okay, is there anything I can help you with? This is the aisle for this is the aisle for that. He made it a little bit goofy. He sort of brought his own quirky style into it, but that was his way, right? He made it into something very personal, very expressive, and very meaningful to him.
So don't necessarily seek work that you love, seek to love the work that you have.
That's part of it,
right?
But also it is about seeking, figuring out who you are and shaping the work to, finding the work that fits you better. So sometimes it is about switching gears and, doing that painful process of finding a different place.
And Veronika, is yours a job, a career, or a calling?
It's a calling. It's absolutely a calling. I'm very, very passionate about what I do.
I loved at the end of your talk, you said, why would we pursue Eudaimonia at all? And
right.
It was something along the lines of, because it's beautiful.
Well, that's the funny thing. I mean, why do the right thing, right? Nobody's going to pay you for it. Nobody's necessarily going to reward you for it. Sometimes you get in a lot of trouble for it. So why do it? And you can't really explain it away with some external reason.
Yes.
That's that in its sort of purest form. Eudaimonia is an end in itself. You do it just because it's right.
All of the research that you've done is so useful and informative for people. And if listeners are trying to make sense of their own careers and lives right now, what's one thing that you could share? Maybe one nugget. Maybe you've learned from your own personal journey or from the learning that you've had through all the research and data that might be helpful for people shaping their own careers, jobs, callings.
Right. Well, I guess I would say one of the most important take-home messages from my research is do a bit of both. Don't just go down the hedonic path. Don't just go down the eudaimonic path. I mean, people often visualize Mother Teresa, right? When you say pure eudaimonist, Mother Teresa was actually a remarkably unhappy woman, and I think she could have been quite a bit happier if she had just taken a little bit for herself, a little bit at least. So I think the proportion, does it have to be 50-50? No, I have no idea, and I doubt we'll ever be able to, slap a number on it. But I think you need some degree of both eudaimonia and hedonia in your life.
Some of that healthy selfishness.
That's right, balanced with doing something that matters, And it can be something very small and something that maybe just matters to you or matters just to your smaller community or your family, but trying to do something that is worthwhile.
Veronika Huta, thank you so much for joining us here on Career Buzz.
Thank you.
I'm Mark Franklin, and you're listening to the Career Buzz podcast. Career Buzz is brought to you by Career Cycles. Take inspired action toward making well-informed career and life choices. Go to careercycles.com to learn about professional one-on-one career management programs using a story listening approach to career counseling. If you're a helping professional looking to scale up career management, visit onelifetools.com to learn about the Who You Are Matters game and online storyteller. We'll hear from Hardy Premsuk second this morning, but I'd like first to let you hear my interview with keynote speaker Kim Cameron. He's professor of management and organizations at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. His research on organizational virtuousness, downsizing, effectiveness, and the development of leadership excellence has been published in more than 130 academic articles and 15 scholarly books. He's one of the co-founders of the Center for Positive Organizations at the University of Michigan and has served as dean and associate dean at Case Western Reserve University, Brigham Young University, and University of Michigan. Kim Cameron was recognized as among the top 10 organizational scholars in the world whose work has been most frequently downloaded on Google. Welcome, Kim Cameron, to Career Buzz.
Thank you, Mark. It's delightful to be invited.
So I know you've founded the Center for Positive Organizational Scholarship. Can you just help us out understanding the story of how this came about before we get into the work of the center itself?
Sure. Thank you, Mark. So for a dozen years or so in my career, I was studying the topic, what happens to organizations when they downsize. And the reason that was important is that downsizing is so ubiquitous. Almost, 2/3 of almost all organizations in North America have downsized in the last 10 years. There's hardly anybody that hasn't been affected by downsizing. Well, after 10 years, one of the major findings was when organizations downsize, they tend to deteriorate in performance. That is, productivity goes south, quality, more mistakes and errors. It's called leadership anemia. The best leaders leave because they're marketable. The people who can't quite get placed in other jobs end up staying. Besides that, leadership gets blamed for the problems. Trust goes down, communication channels get restricted, the threat rigidity response occurs when people get threatened or uncertain. They tend to get rigid. So a dozen things cause organization performance to go south. However, that's typical of about 80 or 85% of organizations. But it still leaves 10 or 15% that get better. Well, the question became over time, what's different about those 10 or 15% of organizations that get better? As it turns out, I didn't have real good data, but I tended to believe that what I was seeing in those 10 or 15% was something I labeled virtuous practices. That is, they tended to be literally compassionate and kind and forgiving and generous, and the kind of attributes that we normally label as virtuous.
If listeners are working in an organization and they're trying to say, gee, is this a virtuous organization? What are some clues? How would I know that I'm actually in a virtuous organization? What could I do to contribute to that virtuousness?
So there's not a magic formula. If there was, everyone would have already applied it. But it's not very complicated. Virtuous organizations are those that help employees, whether or not they're the CEO or whether or not they're the floor sweeper, they help those people flourish. What does that mean? That means helping somebody else get better. So one attribute is people tend to assist and to build and to create opportunities for other people. Another is that there is something called meaningfulness or purpose or an ideology that is more important than simply the work of an individual or even of the organization. That is, something we're doing lasts beyond my lifetime or is more important than simply my paycheck or the reward or the recognition I get. A third, and there are many, by the way, attributes, a third is when people make mistakes, there isn't grudges and punishment and isolation and shunning. Rather, learning from mistakes, allowing people to make mistakes, and helping to reinforce the fact that glad you made the mistake, but let's learn from it. We're not going to make a second mistake in the same way. So the notion of literally institutionalized forgiveness. Now, none of these are rocket science. None of these are costly. Virtuous organizations can be typical of any system, and they can be implemented cost-free.
So just the language, Kim, that you're using, virtuousness and forgiveness, and these are not words that are ordinarily thrown around in organizations. So if you were trying to implement this or recommend, there's the leadership's role in this, and then there's every individual. You may have pockets of virtuousness and forgiveness and, pockets of the exact opposite. How do we talk about this in organizations, and how do we make it happen?
A more easily understood attribute, and it's something that often, especially senior leaders in organizations can do something about, is a concept of positive energy. So let me explain that just a minute. When I interact with Mark, what happens to my energy? Is he uplifting, elevating, life-giving, or is he exhausting, depleting, sucks the life right out of me? In which case he would be a de-energizer. Well, we can measure positive energy. The reason I mention positive energy is because virtuous activity is positively energizing. It helps uplift people. So how would I measure it in an organization? Well, one of the ways is I would simply ask everybody in my unit to respond to every other person in my unit, responding to the question, when I interact with this person, what happens to my energy? Am I uplifted, elevated, or am I depleted, exhausted? So I can create a positive energy network. I can decide who are the positive energizers, and I can also identify the de-energizers. People suck the energy out of the system. Well, what's relevant about that? As it turns out, people's position in the positive energy network is 4 times more important in predicting performance than their position, for example, in the information network. How much of the organization's secrets do they know? Does information flow through them, and so on? And 4 times more important than influence. That is, title. Influential people are normally seen as leaders, but it turns out positive energizers are 4 times more important in predicting performance. So the notion that we actually can measure some of this, and we actually can identify the impact of this on productivity and profitability and all those kinds of things, that actually pays off.
So I guess the question is, how do you turn the de-energizers into positive energizers so you get more of them and fewer of the de-energizers?
That's a great question because it's so crucial. If we have what I call black holes, people who just suck the life out of the system, I have a little 4-step process that I often teach. Number 1 is give people feedback. Listen, understand what's going on, because sometimes you really do need to hear what is happening. But give people feedback. I can remember when I was a young man, my dad said to me, "You are being so negative. You're so critical. It's just not helpful in our family." I had no idea that's how I was coming off. I still remember it. I was 17 probably. I still remember that. Second step, if that doesn't work, often people have no other option. So development, training. Let me make some suggestions about some alternative behaviors. Third, if that doesn't work, make them peripheral. Isolate the virus. Sometimes you just want to take the microphone out of their hand. And then the fourth, if that doesn't work, let them flourish elsewhere. That doesn't mean throw them out with the garbage. That means, look, you're not flourishing here, we're not flourishing here. Let's find some place where you can, but it won't be here.
Wow, I've never heard of somebody talk about downsizing, letting somebody go, dismissing an employee as helping them to flourish elsewhere. That is a very nice reframe.
Thank you, Mark.
I know we just have a moment left. And in all of the things that you've seen, Kim, in your own career now that has had some twists and turns, and some of your students, what's one thing that you've learned personally about making good choices in career and in life? If listeners are trying to benefit from your experience, what's one thing you can share?
I've had several experiences in my life where I felt like I want to accomplish something. I want to be in a position. I want to sit in a leader's seat or something. And what I learned is that when I go against my strengths, when I do things that I'm not inclined to do, I've once in a while chosen to be in a role I really wasn't good at. And what I discovered is it just drained me. It took the positive energy out of my life. It caused me to be more stressed than I want to be. And I felt like I wasn't contributing. I was treading water more than I was helping save other people. So the lesson I think I learned is be in a position where you can help somebody else flourish, as opposed to just to yourself.
Great advice. Kim Cameron, thanks so much for joining us here on Career Buzz.
Thank you, Mark.
Next up, frustrated after a workplace accident, Hardy Premsuk started focusing on whole body health as part of his recovery plan. Unable to find proper tools to help him with this goal, he started working with psychologists, doctors, mathematicians, and others to develop a comprehensive platform that could create a more complete picture of how the body and mind work together. That platform is called the Flourish IQ platform. Check it, flourishiq.com, and it knows how behavior and lifestyle choices impact health. It lets you take charge of your own health. Hardy, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
What do you like about what's happening in your career right now?
The opportunity to build something that has that will have a meaningful impact on many lives. So, Flourish IQ, it's a platform, a well-being platform that we use medical-grade devices, wearable device, as well as psychometrically validated or clinically validated tools to help one to assess their well-being. And the platform gives one coaching, if you will, in an automated fashion, but personalized to the individual based on the data we've collected from our wearable device from the assessment. So what excites me is the impact that we could have on people's lives.
Nice.
Yeah.
So let's figure out how you got here, Hardy. I mean, this is kind of a personal and professional journey for you. Where did you start out in your career?
I was at customer site and a car dealership, and we had a storm, and the sign in front of the car dealership fell, and I was hit in the head.
Like just a freak accident.
It's just a freak accident. I was helping the car dealer owner do up the windows and get the hoods down. The storm came out of nowhere.
Wow.
And instead of the vehicles get wet and all that, I was out there helping them, and this wrong place at the wrong time, and the sign fell, and I ended up at a hospital emergency department with stitches and post-concussive syndrome after the fact. The reason Flourish IQ came to be is the healthcare system failed me in many ways, because my doctors, very lack of time, not that they didn't want to help, but they were unfortunately they were prescription happy. So at one point I was on 4 different medications, all kinds of side effects, and in many ways I was like a zombie with his head injury, and I wanted to find out what was happening to my body. And how is my stress affecting my mind and hence my body and the relationship? So at my worst, my cognitive processing speed was in the 5th percentile. Not quite PTSD, but some variation of that. And you can imagine, you see common these days, PTSD, returning veterans and so forth. Not quite that, and I'm not equating my story to a returning vet, but the symptoms were there. The classic, insomnia, cannot function well, lack of attention, and so forth. Tired because you're not sleeping well, and it's this vicious cycle.
So where was the nugget of the idea where this actual, hey, eureka, I'm going to try something else?
Well, the nugget really came about once the doctor, my neurologist at the time, prescribed. So, for example, I see in Mike's Hospital here in Toronto, there's a program called a mindfulness-based pain management program done by an MD, clinically supervised, but they deny that. Here's one of the top hospitals, done by a medical doctor. This is not hokey, like hokey stuff. This is real science and validation. They said no. So that's what it really, really angered me in many ways. There's evidence of biofeedback to understand the stressors in my life, what impact is that having on my physiology. So I went out and I bought this device. It was $1,500 US. It was very clunky. You had to take out the device, put it into my computer, upload it. And I started doing some more research, and I said, I'm sure I'm not the only one suffering from stress-related issues and the negative effects of stress. And that's where the light bulb went off. I said, listen, I gotta look at. So I started researching what else is out there. So our device is a clinical device. It's a clinical grade ECG monitor. From that, we can then, our algorithms will detect your physiological stress, coping. We can also do sleep analysis. The device itself has a microphone on it, so we can do correlation with your respiration rate, the snoring, and along with a number of other parameters to give you an indication if you have a sleep disorder breathing, for example. A lot of people don't realize.
So how do I take the data? Because I understand now that the wearable connects to an app on my smartphone. So if I start looking at some patterns in the data, what can I do with that biofeedback?
Well, the app itself, we have the intelligence built into it to give you both micro interventions, and if, for example, you're suffering from insomnia. Now, that's a clinical condition. Maybe you start off with our bigger program, our Sleep IQ program, that will walk you through this. Maybe it's a 2.5 months, 3 months program. Each week you're given a certain exercise to do, possibly some breathing techniques as an example, to help with your insomnia symptoms, if you will. Yeah.
So these recommendations for interventions come from the specific feedback from your body.
Exactly. And where else would you get it? We're taking a clinical grade device, extracting that data, and then giving you the insights that you would need to make goal-directed decisions.
So what about workplace stress? What are some things that I might do that I could then see through the biofeedback we're making a difference?
So let's say if in the workplace, a particular event, that you hate, like let's say like you're an introvert, but your boss requires you to do every 2 or 3 days to present in front of a group of people. Well, you know you're going to be stressed out. I mean, you then have the sort of the tools to say, well, you know what? Or number one, either switch your job, or your job description changes, or talk to your boss. Or number two, gives you the insights as to how to deal with it better preparation. So what specifically is causing that stressor, as one example? The device is worn pervasively, so we can give you context. Is it in fact your job that's stressing you out?
So you can pinpoint it better and
figure out what it is. It can pinpoint it. So what we do actually quite well, we're going to link your calendar so we can see specific activities that's stressing you out. So you can get that on a dashboard.
Remind yourself, where was I last Monday when the stress went off the chart? So how can listeners find out more?
Yeah, well, you can visit our website at flourishiq.com.
Hardy Premsuk, thanks so much for joining us here on Career Buzz.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Career Buzz podcast. Find us on iTunes or visit careercycles.com/radio to subscribe and download past episodes. Get inspiring career stories full of twists and turns, actionable ideas from career experts, and new ideas to empower your own career and life.